The wine splashed down my velvet dress like blood on snow. I froze, the glass still trembling in my hand, while laughter erupted around the table. My sister Clara clutched her stomach, wheezing through her giggles. "Oh my God, Melissa, look at you. You should have known better than to wear blue when you're always spilling something." My mother Diane pressed a napkin into my hand, shaking her head as though disappointed in a maid, not a daughter. "If you were a real servant," she said, half smiling, "you'd be fired by now." Even my father chuckled softly, trying to smooth the tension. It only made it worse. The chandelier light shimmered off the puddle of red wine spreading across the tablecloth. No one offered to help. They just watched me kneel and blot the stain as if I'd been born to clean up after them. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon butter felt nauseating. In the living room, the fireplace crackled, stockings hung in perfect order the same way it had every year since I was old enough to cook. I heard Clara humming to herself, scrolling through her phone, and my mother whispering to my father about how Melissa gets too emotional. I wasn't emotional. I was exhausted. My hands shook as I carried the stained tablecloth toward the laundry room. When I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, a stranger looked back. Cheeks flushed, eyes damp, posture small. I looked like someone's employee, someone obedient. Stephen, my boyfriend, was standing by the kitchen island. He had just arrived from his firm's office party, still wearing his gray wool coat. His eyes met mine, filled with quiet disbelief. "Did she really say that to you?" he asked under his breath. I forced a smile. "It's fine. She's had too much wine." "Melissa," he said softly. "This isn't fine. You're not their maid." I opened my mouth to argue, but before I could, my mother called out from the dining room, "Sweetheart, can you bring the extra gravy and maybe fix the fire? It's dying down." Stephen stared at me like he wanted to stop me physically, but I just nodded and whispered, "I'll handle it." The same words I'd said every Christmas Eve since I was 23. As I stirred the gravy, Clara's voice rang out again. "Hurry up, we're starving. Guess the help's running behind schedule." Another round of laughter. My father's deep chuckle joined in like punctuation. I closed my eyes, inhaled the smell of garlic and butter, and felt something inside me split quietly but completely. Dinner dragged on with the same rhythm as every year. My mother critiqued every dish. "You should have gone lighter on the salt." Clara bragged about her new yoga studio membership. My father told the same story about his college football days. No one asked me anything about my life, my students, my art class, the grant I'd won that fall. I was invisible except when a serving platter ran low. When I brought out dessert, my mother leaned toward Clara and whispered not quietly enough, "She's single again next year, I'm sure." I almost dropped the tray. Stephen noticed. He set his fork down, eyes narrowing. "Enough," he said suddenly. Loud enough to cut through the clatter. The room froze. "Melissa does everything for you people and you treat her like dirt. Don't you see it?" My father frowned. "We're just joking. Don't make it dramatic." Dramatic? Stephen's voice was steady, but I heard the anger trembling beneath it. "She's been serving you all night. She hasn't even sat down," Clara smirked. "Oh please, she loves hosting. She lives for this." Something in me went still. That sentence, the confidence in it, the assumption, was the final drop in a bucket that had overflowed years ago. I set the dessert knife down. My voice came out calm, detached. "Enjoy your meal." Clara rolled her eyes. "Here we go again. The victim act," Clara Stephen warned. But she lifted her glass anyway, sneering. "To Melissa, the best servant in the family." She tipped the wine toward me, and before I could move it spilled again, staining the tablecloth, my sleeve, the floor. No one gasped. They just stared, waiting to see if I'd laugh it off. Instead, I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes when you've already made your decision. "Excuse me," I said, and turned away. I went upstairs without a word. I changed out of the ruined dress, slipped into jeans and a sweater, and pulled my overnight bag from the closet. I'd packed it weeks ago, though I hadn't known why. Maybe part of me always knew this moment would come. I grabbed my car keys and phone, paused by the window, and looked out at the snow beginning to fall across the driveway. The world outside looked peaceful, untouched. Downstairs laughter started again, nervous, brittle. I heard my mother mutter something about me being too sensitive. I walked past the front door but stopped. They'd see me leave that way. Instead, I went through the kitchen into the mudroom and out the back door. The air hit my face like ice water. I inhaled deeply, felt my lungs sting, and smiled for real this time. The snow crunched under my boots as I crossed to my car. Stephen must have seen me from the window because he followed quietly, his breath visible in the cold. "Melissa," he said, voice. "Lo, where are you going?" "To the cabin," I said. "Your cabin?" "In the woods," I nodded. "I need to breathe." He hesitated, eyes scanning my face. "Do you want me to come?" I shook my head. "No, I want them to notice the silence." He looked like he wanted to argue, but instead he reached out and brushed my cheek. "Text me when you get there." "Okay, I will." I slid into my old Subaru, the seatbelt scraping against the fabric of my sweater. Through the windshield, the house glowed warm and golden. I watched the silhouettes move behind the curtains, my family still talking, still laughing, still certain I'd come back to clean up their mess. The engine hummed softly as I pulled out of the driveway. The radio played faint Christmas music, tinny and distant. For the first time in years, I didn't feel dread at the sound. I felt weightless. By the time they noticed I was gone, the house would already be dark, the dishes still dirty, the table still stained with wine. By then, I'd be halfway up the mountain road where the world was silent and no one expected anything from me. I turned off my phone. The headlights cut through the falling snow, carving a path into the woods ahead. And somewhere between the city lights fading behind me and the forest opening before me, I realized I wasn't running away. I was finally heading home. Bant de Noy. The road wound through the trees like a silver thread, half buried under the weight of new snow. My car heater hummed low, but it couldn't quiet the sound of my thoughts. The cabin was still an hour away, and the world around me was painted in black and white pine shadows, headlights frost. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than necessary. I wasn't running from home. I was running from 10 Christmases that had hollowed the word home out of meaning. For the first time in years, I wasn't racing against a timer in the kitchen or counting plates. I was racing toward silence. It hadn't always been this way. 10 years earlier, I'd thought hosting Christmas was proof of adulthood, a crown of responsibility I wore proudly. I'd just turned 23, had a steady job, teaching art at the elementary school, and I wanted to make my parents proud. That first year, I scrubbed every corner of my small Portland house, polished the wine glasses, and hung garlands that made the place look like a magazine spread. My parents, Robert and Diane, arrived with their casseroles and commentary. My younger sister, Clara, came late, trailing perfume and self-pity from her latest breakup. But it was fine. It was family. Back then, I thought love looked like effort. By year 3, effort had become expectation. "Of course we'll do it at your place," my mother said once, like it was a law of nature. "You're so organized." Clara nodded, adding, "Besides, Mom hates cooking, and your kitchen's perfect for big dinners." My father said nothing, just smiled, his easy smile, the kind that said he agreed with everyone, so no one would be angry. That's how it always was. I worked, they rested, and I convinced myself I liked it. Every Christmas blurred into the next. Same turkey, same tension. I'd wake up early to defrost pies, marinate the roast, vacuum the floors. The kitchen timer became my clock, the clang of dishes my soundtrack. When the doorbell rang, it wasn't excitement, I felt it was pressure. I'd greet them at the door, still wearing an apron, mascara half smudged, pretending to be cheerful while juggling 4 pots at once. My mother would inspect the table as if it were a test. "The gravy's too thin," she'd say. "You should have used cornstarch." My father would turn up the TV volume to drown out any discomfort. Clara would scroll her phone, sipping wine like a critic waiting to be entertained. I never sat down until dessert, and by then my food was cold. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being their daughter and became the stagehand to their holiday. When I caught the flu one year and asked if we could skip the gathering, my mother sighed, "Family doesn't cancel Christmas." So I cooked through a fever, dizzy and sweating while they toasted to tradition. I told myself that was love. Love meant keeping everyone comfortable even if it made me sick. Clara was always the golden one, the delicate, dramatic type everyone tiptoed around. After her divorce, she moved back into our parents' orbit full of complaints and wine-fueled stories about her terrible ex. She was a tornado, but somehow I was the one who had to clean up the wreckage. "You're just better at handling things," she used to say. "I'm not like you." The way she said it, it sounded like a compliment. It wasn't. It was a sentence disguised as praise. I think the first crack appeared the year Stephen entered my life. He saw through the chaos right away. During his first Christmas at my house, he whispered while helping me set the table. "Why are you doing this alone?" I laughed it off. "It's tradition." He frowned. Tradition or servitude? I didn't answer. I couldn't. That night, he washed dishes beside me while everyone else opened gifts in the living room. The laughter carried through the walls like an insult. "You know they don't even realize you're missing," he said. I remember staring at the soapy water, feeling something inside me go still. That was the first time I wondered what would happen if I simply stopped showing up. But change never comes easy when guilt is your inheritance. My mother had built her entire life on the belief that love meant sacrifice, and she passed that belief to me like fine china. "You're so dependable, Melissa," she always said. "Clara's sensitive. You're strong." And I wore that strength like armor until it became a chain. This year, when she called in early November, her voice was brisk and confident. "So, same plan for Christmas Eve, right? Not a question, an assumption." I almost said yes out of habit. But the word caught in my throat. "Actually, Mom," I said carefully, "maybe we could try something different this year. A potluck, or maybe at your place." A long pause. "Honey, your house just feels right for it. You have the space." "But what if I want to rest this year?" I asked. She chuckled softly. "Oh, Melissa, you love hosting. Don't be difficult." Then she hung up before I could respond. That call haunted me. Every year I had asked for help. Every year I'd been told, "Don't make a fuss." The roles were carved in stone, I provided they consumed. I realized I'd never been asked what I wanted for Christmas, not once. Not even as a child. The weight of it pressed down on me as the weeks crept closer to December. I caught myself fantasizing. What if I didn't host? What if I didn't clean? Didn't cook? Didn't bend? Then came the call from Clara. "So we're all good for Christmas Eve," she chirped. "The kids are excited. Mom's already talking about your stuffing." I hesitated. "I haven't confirmed anything yet." "Wait," she laughed. "You're kidding, right? It's tradition. Maybe it's time for a new one," I said softly. "Oh, come on. The house looks perfect. The kids love it there, and Mom can't drive far with her back." She said it like she was reading from a script. When I didn't respond, she sighed. "Melissa, don't be weird about this. It's Christmas." After that call, something inside me shifted. I stopped arguing. I stopped explaining. I just decided. The idea of escape didn't come as rebellion, it came as relief. I started planning quietly, step by step, like building a secret life. I called my landlord and revoked emergency access to my spare key. I arranged to borrow a friend's cabin in the mountains. I even pretended to buy groceries for the feast just to keep up appearances. My family thought I was preparing another Christmas miracle. In reality, I was preparing for peace. Now, as the road curved toward the mountains, my heart finally slowed. The headlights swept over snow-laden trees, and for the first time in a decade, I wasn't thinking about whether the roast would dry out. I was thinking about air-clean cold mine to breathe. When I reached the cabin, the silence hit me like warmth. I parked, stepped out, and listened. No voices, no demands. Just the whisper of snow. Inside, the cabin smelled like pine and cedar. I lit a fire, wrapped myself in a blanket, and sat by the window watching flakes drift down through the night. My phone buzzed on the table. Unread texts, missed calls. I didn't look. I just stared into the fire until the flames blurred and whispered, "This is what peace sounds like." For 10 Christmases, I'd been the maid, the manager, the buffer, the daughter who never said no. But tonight, I was simply Melissa. Not the glue that held everyone together. Not the quiet caretaker who fixed what others broke. Just a woman in a cabin in the woods finally resting. I thought of my family back home, probably assuming I was running late. Maybe annoyed, maybe worried. But it didn't matter. They would find out soon enough. They would walk into my house, see the empty table, and read the note I'd left. This year, I chose peace. And for the first time in years, I smiled, not the polite kind, but the kind that comes from realizing you've finally stepped out of your own cage. The cabin was still and warm when I woke the next morning. Sunlight poured through the frosted window, turning the air into gold. For a few seconds, I forgot everything, the laughter, the wine, the humiliation. Then I saw my phone on the table. It buzzed once, then again, vibrating against the wood like an insect trapped in a jar. I didn't reach for it. I just watched. The first few calls came from Clara, then Mom, then Dad. The buzzing stopped for a moment, long enough for me to hear the soft hiss of the fire. I thought about ignoring it forever, letting the world below dissolve into static. But curiosity won. I picked up the phone and unlocked it. The screen exploded with notifications. "Melissa, where are you? We're here." "This isn't funny," Mom's worried. "The kids are hungry. Call us now." And then from Clara, "Unbelievable. You ruined Christmas." My thumb hovered over the screen. I scrolled message after message, each one sharpening the same truth: they weren't worried about me. They were angry that their Christmas had stopped running smoothly. I imagined them standing in my kitchen, staring at the empty counter, the note on the table. Maybe they thought it was a prank. Maybe they'd finally realized the miracle worker had taken the night off. The phone rang again. I let it. The name flashing across the screen: Mom. I could almost hear her voice even before answering, the sigh, the soft guilt wrapped in sweetness. I didn't pick up. I poured myself coffee instead. The cabin was silent, except for the wind brushing the windows. A memory came to me uninvited. Stephen and I sitting at a cafe downtown just last month, him stirring his espresso slowly. You know what would happen if you stopped doing everything he'd said. They'd panic. Not because they miss you, but because they can't function without you. I'd rolled my eyes. "That's cruel." He'd shaken his head. "No, that's honest." He was right. My phone buzzed again, this time with voicemails. I put it on speaker and let them play while I made breakfast. Mom's voice filled the cabin first. "Melissa, honey, this is your mother. The kids are confused. Please call us back. We're worried." Clara's voice followed, sharp and thin. "You're being ridiculous. Stop acting like a victim. You made Mom cry. Congratulations." Then Dad's deep voice. "Your mother's upset, sweetheart. We didn't mean anything last night. Just come home." Each message blurred into the next, a carousel of guilt, obligation, and manipulation disguised as love. I sat at the small wooden table, hands wrapped around my mug, and realized how quiet the world was without their noise. I stepped outside. The air stung my face, but it felt clean. Snow stretched in every direction, untouched, glistening under the late morning Sunday. I walked to the edge of the clearing and looked up at the mountains. They looked ancient, unmoved by human drama. I exhaled and watched my breath fade into the cold air. If I go back now, I whispered, it all starts again. The thought sent a small thrill of fear through me. I'd never truly chosen myself before. Not once. Every decision in my life had been filtered through someone else's comfort. The thought of breaking that pattern was both terrifying and exhilarating. When I returned to the cabin, another voicemail was waiting. It was Dad again. His voice cracked near the end. "Your mother's back is hurting. The kids are crying. I think we messed up, honey. Please just tell us where you are." I stared at the phone for a long time, then opened the door and stepped outside again. The cold bit at my skin. I dropped the phone into the snow face-up screen still glowing. I watched as frost began to form on the edges. It buzzed once more before going silent. The sound of the wind replaced it. For the first time in years, no one could reach me. Inside, I lit the fireplace again. I cooked myself a simple lunch: pasta, garlic, olive oil. The cabin filled with a soft, buttery smell. I sat by the fire, eating slowly, feeling warmth crawl back into my chest. I thought of the note on my kitchen table, of the faces that must have read it. This year I chose peace. Clara would have rolled her eyes. Mom would have cried, not from sadness but from insult. Dad would have tried to keep everyone calm. And yet I couldn't help but smile. For once, they were the ones forced to clean up the mess. By late afternoon, my phone screen had dimmed. I wiped the frost off and checked the messages again, curiosity getting the better of me. They'd changed tone. "Mom, sweetheart," the children cried themselves to sleep. "You can't do this to them. Clara, you think you're proving something, you're just cruel. Dad, please call us, just tell us you're safe." Mom again. "After all we've done for you, this is how you thank us." The words burned, but in a strange way they didn't hurt. They just sounded familiar, predictable, like lines in a play I'd finally stopped acting in. I put the phone on the mantel and turned away. The sun was sinking and the sky outside glowed pink and orange. I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window. Snowflakes drifted lazily past the glass. My reflection looked different in the fading light, tired but strong. There were no voices behind me, no footsteps, no demands. I sat down with my journal open to a blank page and began to write. Maybe revenge doesn't always roar. Maybe it just sits quietly in a cabin listening to silence louder than any apology. I smiled at the sentence and kept writing. Every word I put down felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been buried under guilt. The phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't my family. Stephen's name appeared. Just checking in, the message read, "Proud of you. Merry Christmas, Mel." I stared at it, warmth spreading through me like the fire. I typed back, "Merry Christmas." For the first time, it actually feels like one. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky had turned a deep blue, and the first stars shimmered between the pine branches. I set my glass down and opened the door, stepping onto the porch. The cold air kissed my face, sharp but pure. The world was utterly still, as if holding its breath. Somewhere down the mountain, I imagined my family still calling, still arguing, still trying to make sense of my absence. But here, all I could hear was the soft creak of the wood beneath my feet, and the heartbeat of quiet that belonged entirely to me. I thought about what Stephen once said, that they wouldn't see my worth until I disappeared. Maybe he was right, or maybe it didn't matter. Maybe the point wasn't to make them see. Maybe the point was finally seeing myself. When I went back inside, the fire had burned low. I added another log and watched the flames catch sparks curling upward like tiny golden birds. I curled up in the armchair, pulled the blanket over my knees, and listened to the steady rhythm of my breathing. For 10 years, I'd given everything I had to make everyone else's Christmas perfect. Tonight, I didn't owe anyone perfection. I didn't owe anyone anything. By the time I finished my wine, the phone screen had gone dark. The battery died, leaving the room illuminated only by firelight. I didn't plug it in. I didn't need to. Outside, snow began to fall again, gently this time, as if the world was tucking itself in for the night. I closed my eyes and let the quiet fill every corner of me. Somewhere far below, my family was still calling, but for once I wasn't answering to them. I was answering to myself. I wasn't there to see it, but I could picture every second. My family standing in my kitchen, staring at the note I'd left on the dining table. The light above the table buzzing faintly, the smell of cooling food drifting through the air. My mother's voice sharp as the edge of a plate. "Where's Melissa?" she'd demand, already irritated. No one would answer. My father would check the backyard, maybe the garage, expecting to find me rearranging something, fixing some imagined problem. But all they'd find was silence. I could almost see Clara picking up the note, her painted nails tapping against the paper. She'd read it aloud, mocking my handwriting. This year I chose peace. There'd be a beat of confusion before the explosion began. She wouldn't just leave, Mom would say, first denial coating her words like frosting on a burnt cake. She probably went to the store. Clara would scoff. With her phone off, please. Dad, ever the mediator, would try to stay calm. Let's just sit down. Maybe she needed a minute. But my mother never knew how to sit down when things didn't go her way. She'd start pacing, hands fluttering like anxious birds. After everything I did, she walks out on Christmas Eve. What's wrong with that girl? The irony, of course, was that everything she did had been done by me. In my mind, I could see the fight unravel like bad theater. Clara blaming Mom for being controlling, Mom accusing Clara of ruining dinner, Dad retreating to the porch to smoke a cigarette he'd quit years ago. The kids crying, the food growing cold. My perfect family portrait falling apart without the glue that held it together. Me. Back in the cabin, I sat by the fire, the scene playing out behind my eyes as my phone lit up again. Voicemails, texts, missed calls. I pressed play on one. Mom's voice, shaking with anger and panic. Melissa, this is your mother. You've embarrassed us in front of everyone. The neighbors came by and we didn't even know what to tell them. Call me immediately. Another one from Clara. You've always had a flair for drama, but this is next level. Enjoy your little pity party. Then Dad's quieter tone. Honey, your mother's upset, but we can talk this out. Just tell us you're safe. I closed my eyes and let the words wash over me. It wasn't anger I felt, not even guilt, just recognition. Every voicemail sounded like every conversation we'd ever had. They were still trying to make me small, even from miles away. I walked to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. My hair was tangled, my face tired, but there was something else there now, clarity. I thought of all the times I'd stared into mirrors, before adjusting my smile, before family dinners, whispering to myself, just get through it. Tonight, I didn't need to get through anything. I was free. The phone buzzed again. This time it was a voice message from Clara, slurred and brittle. You think you're better than us. You always were Mom's favorite. You think leaving makes you strong. It just makes you cruel. Her words echoed in the small cabin. For a moment I wanted to be angry, but instead I felt something softer, sadness. Clara wasn't the villain she pretended to be. She was just another woman trapped in the same cycle, trying to stay afloat by pulling someone else under. I remembered a Christmas when we were kids. Mom had been teaching us to wrap gifts. Clara, 8 years old, had messed up the paper, tearing a corner. She'd burst into tears, and Mom had turned to me without missing a beat. Fix it for her, Melissa. You're better at this, so I had. I'd always been better at fixing things for everyone except myself. Now, decades later, I was still unwrapping that lesson. The phone buzzed one last time, a new voicemail from Dad. I pressed play. Your mother's sleeping now, he said, his voice low, weary. We shouldn't have said the things we did. Maybe you just needed space. I guess I never realized how much you do for us. For her. For all of us. I'm sorry. The words caught me off guard. Simple, unpolished, real. I felt something in my chest loosen. For years I'd thought I needed my mother's validation to feel seen, but hearing my father's quiet apology was enough. It wasn't perfect, but it was human. I sank into the armchair by the fire and pulled the blanket around my shoulders. The wind outside howled softly like a lullaby. My family was miles away, but for the first time their voices didn't fill me with dread. They were learning, maybe in pain, maybe angry, but they were feeling something. And I was too. I imagined Mom sitting at the kitchen table long after everyone went home, her wine glass untouched, the note still in front of her. Maybe she'd read it over and over, trying to understand. Maybe she'd start to see what I'd been trying to say for years. Clara, probably lying in bed, would replay her outburst, the wine-fueled insults she'd thrown like darts. Underneath it all, I knew there was guilt, and maybe, just maybe, under the guilt, love. Back home, the chaos I used to clean up was finally theirs to deal with. That was my revenge, if you could call it that, forcing them to sit with the mess I'd spent a decade quietly managing. The thought should have made me smug. Instead, it made me calm. I poured another glass of wine and sat back. The firelight flickered against the wooden walls. The night outside was endless, but I didn't feel small anymore. I felt expansive, as if the silence had carved out space inside me where guilt used to live. For years I'd thought standing up for myself would mean yelling, demanding, fighting to be heard. But the power was in the quiet, the refusal to explain the decision to stop playing a role I never auditioned for. My phone chimed again. Another voicemail, one line long. "Come home when you're ready. We love you." It was from Dad. I smiled through the tears that surprised me. Maybe they'd never fully understand, but maybe they didn't have to. Understanding wasn't the point. Respect was. I walked to the door and opened it. Cold air rushed in sharp and bracing. Snowflakes floated through the porch light, landing softly on my sweater. I breathed in the quiet. The cabin was surrounded by pine trees, their branches heavy with snow, their stillness matching mine. Behind me, the fire crackled. Ahead of me, the world waited. For 10 years, I'd been the one to hold everything together. Tonight, I let it all fall apart, and it was beautiful. I closed the door, set down my glass, and wrote a single line in my journal. They used to call me dependable. Now they just call. Maybe that's the first step to change. I smiled, let the pen rest, and whispered to the fire, "That's enough for tonight." The flames shifted brighter for a moment, as if answering back. I leaned into the warmth, my eyes closing slowly. Outside, the snow fell heavier, now blanketing the cabin in white. Somewhere down the mountain, my family was still talking, still processing, still trying to make sense of the silence I'd left behind. But for once, I didn't feel responsible for what they felt. I just felt free. The quiet the next morning felt different. Not peaceful, just hollow. I woke to the soft crackle of the dying fire and the faint chill that crept in through the cabin walls. For the first time, the silence didn't soothe me. It sat heavy in my chest, pressing down where chaos used to live. I'd wanted solitude for so long, but now that I had it, I wasn't sure what to do with it. The clock on the mantel ticked like a heartbeat. I made coffee, poured it into a chipped mug, and sat at the small table by the window. Outside, the world was white and still. A deer moved through the trees, slow and careful, its breath visible in the cold air. The smell of coffee mingled with pine smoke, grounding me in this unfamiliar peace. For years, I'd begged for one morning like this. No demands, no footsteps, no one shouting from another room, "Melissa, where's the gravy?" But now all I could hear was my own breathing. Peace wasn't as simple as silence. It had its own kind of noise, the noise of old thoughts resurfacing, asking questions I didn't want to answer. Was I selfish for leaving? Would they forgive me? Did I even want them to? I looked at my hands resting on the table. The same hands that had cooked, cleaned, carried, comforted. They'd been busy for so long that stillness felt unnatural. I took another sip of coffee, staring at the steam curling upward, and realized that this awkward quiet was what freedom looked like before it became comfortable. I decided to write. It wasn't something I'd planned, but my fingers itched for a pen. I found a notebook in my bag, one I'd brought to sketch in, and began a letter. "Dear Mom, you raised me to be strong. But somewhere along the way, strength became servitude. You taught me to hold things together even when they broke me. I don't hate you for that. I just need to stop living inside your version of love." I paused, staring at the page. The words looked raw, too alive. I wanted to scratch them out, but I didn't. I'm not angry anymore. I just don't want to be small to make everyone else comfortable. This year I chose peace. Maybe next year you'll choose respect. I folded the page neatly and slid it into the back of the notebook. I wasn't going to send it. It wasn't for her. It was for me. The fire had gone out by the time I put the pen down. I wrapped myself in a blanket and watched the light change on the snow. Time moved differently here, stretching thin, unmeasured by chores or complaints. For a fleeting moment, I thought I could live like this forever, just me, the woods, and no one else's expectations. But even peace gets lonely. A soft knock startled me. My heart leapt before I realized it wasn't a knock at all. It was the sound of snow sliding off the roof. I laughed under my breath and shook my head. Even my imagination was still waiting for someone to show up. When the loneliness grew louder, I put on my coat and stepped outside. The cold hit me like a clean slap. I walked toward the tree-lined boots, sinking deep into the snow. The air smelled sharp, almost electric. Every crunch of my footsteps felt like punctuation in the stillness. I reached a clearing and stopped tilting my head back to watch flakes drift down. "I'm here," I whispered, as if the forest needed to know. It wasn't much, but saying it out loud mattered. For years I'd spoken in apologies and explanations. This was the first time I'd spoken just to hear my own voice. When I got back to the cabin, I saw movement through the frosted window. My neighbor Janet was standing outside the door, a paper bag in her hands. She lived in the next cabin down the road, a woman in her 60s with silver hair tucked under a wool hat. I'd met her once before when I borrowed firewood. "Morning," she called when I opened the door. "Brought you some gingerbread. I figured you might not have much company." I smiled, surprised by how much I needed the kindness. "You figured right." She came in stamping snow from her boots. The smell of cinnamon filled the cabin. "It's beautiful up here," she said, glancing around. "Quiet, though. Sometimes too quiet." "I'm starting to learn that," I said. Janet studied me for a moment, her expression knowing. "You hiding from someone or just resting from them?" I hesitated, then laughed softly. "Both, I guess." She nodded like she'd expected that answer. I did the same thing once. After my husband passed, I stopped cooking for everyone. First Christmas I spent alone, I cried the whole day. Second Christmas I realized I was free. Peace feels lonely at first, dear. Then it becomes power. Her words landed like a truth I'd been circling but hadn't dared to say. "I hope you're right." "I am," she said, simply squeezing my arm before leaving. "You'll see." After she left, I stood by the door for a long time, staring at the snow still swirling outside. Peace becomes power. The phrase echoed in my mind. Maybe this was what the transformation felt like, the ache before the healing. I made myself lunch, eggs and toast, and scrolled through my phone for the first time all morning. More messages had arrived. "Mom, we're leaving soon. Can you at least tell us you're safe, Clara? You made Mom cry all morning. Hope you're happy. Dad, your mother won't say it, but she's worried sick." I read them all, then put the phone face down on the counter. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even tempted to respond. I just felt calm. Their words no longer pierced me. They were simply proof of the roles they hadn't yet learned to outgrow. The sun began to dip, early bleeding gold and pink through the trees. I bundled up and walked outside again, this time toward the frozen creek that wound behind the cabin. The snow sparkled like crushed glass under the fading light. I stood on the bank and let the wind brush my hair back, my breath curling into the air. My revenge, I whispered, was never leaving them behind. It was finding myself. The words made me laugh quietly, half out of disbelief, half out of release. By the time I returned, the cabin was dark, except for the faint glow of the fire. I lit a candle and set it in the center of the table. The flame flickered gently, painting gold on the wood. I stared at it for a while, letting the quiet hum of the world fill my ears. "For 10 years," I murmured. "I lit candles for everyone else's comfort. Tonight I light one for my peace." The flame leaned toward me, bright and steady, as if it understood. I sat down with my journal again and wrote one final line for the day. "Family doesn't disappear when you walk away. It just becomes something you can love from a distance." I closed the book and blew out the candle. The room fell into darkness, soft and forgiving. By the time I slipped into bed, I felt lighter, not because I'd escaped them, but because I'd finally found the courage to be still. Outside snow kept falling silent and endless, covering the footprints I'd left behind. The knock came just as I was pouring my second cup of coffee. It was faint at first, 3 slow taps that barely registered over the crackle of the fire. I froze the cup hovering in midair. No one knew I was here. My mind raced through possibilities: a lost hiker, a neighbor, or worse, family. The knocking came again, louder this time. I set the cup down and walked to the window. Through the swirl of falling snow, I saw 2 figures standing on the porch. One tall and broad-shouldered, the other smaller, arms crossed tight against the cold. My breath caught in my throat. Even from this distance I knew them. My father and Clara. For a moment I considered not answering at all. Let them knock until their knuckles froze. Let them feel what silence sounded like on my terms. But curiosity, or maybe old reflex, pushed me forward. I cracked the door open. The cold rushed in, sharp and immediate. "Melissa," Dad said softly, his voice clouding in the frosty air. "We just wanted to make sure you were safe." Clara rolled her eyes, snow caught in her hair like tiny shards of glass. "Nice place to hide," she muttered. I stared at them, unsure what to say. Part of me wanted to slam the door and lock it, but another part, the part that still remembered being the family caretaker, stepped aside. "Come in," I said quietly. They stomped their boots and stepped inside. The firelight painted them in shades of gold and shadow. Dad looked older than I remembered, lines carved deep into his forehead. Clara, though, looked exactly the same, beautiful, brittle, restless. She scanned the cabin with a quick, judgmental sweep. "Cozy," she said flatly. "How long were you planning to stay here anyway?" "Long enough," I replied. Dad rubbed his hands together. "We were worried. Your mother, well, she's been—" Clara cut in. "She's been losing her mind, that's what she's been. You could have at least called." I said nothing. The kettle began to whistle softly behind me, and I turned away to take it off the stove. My hands were steady, but my heart was not. We sat at the small wooden table, the same one where I'd written the letter to my mother days before. Dad tried to smile, his voice gentle. "It's good to see you." I nodded, but stayed silent. Clara crossed her arms. "You've caused quite a mess, you know. Mom's crying, the kids are confused. You just vanished." "I left a note," I said. "Yeah," she scoffed. "This year I chose peace." "That's not a note, Melissa. That's a declaration of war." Dad shot her a look. "Clara." "No," she went on, her voice rising. "She acts like she's the victim, but she's the one who ruined everything. Mom's embarrassed. Everyone's talking about it. You humiliated her." I met her eyes and said quietly, "I didn't humiliate her. I stopped letting her humiliate me." The words hung there, hot and electric, cutting through the quiet. Clara blinked, caught off guard, then forced a laugh. "Wow. Dramatic much?" I leaned back in my chair. "You came all this way to scold me." "We came because we care," she snapped. "You broke Mom's heart." Dad sighed. "Clara, please." "No," she said again, louder. "I'm sick of everyone tiptoeing around her feelings when she doesn't care about anyone else's. You don't just disappear on Christmas, Melissa." I stood up. "You mean I don't disappear from service?" Dad rose slowly too, his voice low. "Girls, stop. This isn't helping." Clara turned on him. "You always defend her. She gets away with everything." Something in me cracked. "Gets away with everything," I said, laughing bitterly. "You think cooking, cleaning, hosting, babysitting, and being insulted is getting away with something." She looked at me, face flushed. "You chose that, nobody forced you." I felt my voice drop, calm but sharp. "No, I was trained for it." The silence that followed was heavy. Even the fire seemed to dim. Dad rubbed the back of his neck. "Your mother never meant to what I cut in. Turn me into her servant. Teach me that love means exhaustion. That's not meaning well, Dad. That's control dressed up as care." He looked down at the floor. For the first time I saw the guilt in his eyes, the quiet admission he'd never said aloud. Clara exhaled, shaking her head. "You've changed," she said finally. "You sound cold." "I sound clear," I said. She walked to the counter, picked up the half-empty bottle of wine from last night, and smirked. So this is what peace looks like, hiding in a cabin drinking alone. That's enough, Dad said firmly. But Clara was already pouring herself a glass, her voice trembling now. You think you're so much better than the rest of us, don't you? You think running away makes you strong. I walked over and gently took the bottle from her. I think burning myself out to keep you all comfortable was killing me. I spent 10 years setting myself on fire to keep everyone warm. I'm done burning. Clara stared at me, her eyes glistening. For a long moment she didn't speak. Then her face softened, the fight leaving her shoulders. You were supposed to be the strong one, she said quietly. When you disappear, what do I have left? Something inside me broke. I reached out and touched her arm. You have yourself, Clara. That's what I'm learning too. Dad looked between us, his eyes glassy. Maybe we all forgot how to love without control, he murmured. The three of us stood there in silence, the fire crackling behind us. For once it wasn't angry silence, it was heavy, honest, almost sacred. Finally, I took a breath. I'm not coming back, I said softly. Not yet. I'll visit when I'm ready. But next Christmas won't be at my house. That's not up for discussion. Dad nodded slowly. That's fair. Clara looked away, biting her lip. Mom won't understand tonight, she said. But maybe someday. I walked them to the door. The snow outside had thickened flakes drifting lazily down through the gray light. They lingered on the porch, hesitant. Dad turned and said, Take care of yourself, kiddo. I will, I said. Clara hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged me. It was quick, awkward, but real. When they left, I stood on the porch watching the car disappear between the trees. The taillights glowed red for a few seconds, then vanished into the white. Inside, the cabin felt smaller but lighter, as if the air itself had exhaled. I sank onto the couch, the echo of their voices still hanging in the air. My hands trembled, not from anger but from release. For years, I'd thought standing up for myself meant shouting until someone listened, but now I knew the truth it meant, speaking once clearly and letting the silence carry the rest. I wrote one line in my journal before bed. They came to find me, but what they really found was the part of me they'd buried years ago. The fire burned low as I lay back watching the shadows dance on the ceiling. Outside, the snow kept falling, erasing every footprint that had led them here. When I finally closed my eyes, I wasn't afraid of the quiet anymore. It no longer felt like hiding, it felt like home. I thought that after they left, I'd finally rest. But peace has a way of keeping you awake. The cabin was dim except for the soft light of the fire and the whisper of snow brushing against the windows. I sat curled in the armchair, a blanket over my legs, staring at the 2 coffee mugs they'd left behind. The air still carried their voices, Clara's sharp, Dad's careful, my own trembling restraint. Now that it was quiet again, I wasn't sure whether I felt lighter or lonelier. The clock ticked steadily, filling the room like a heartbeat. I reached for my notebook and opened to a blank page, but the pen hovered uselessly in my hand. All I could think about were the words Dad had said before leaving. Maybe we all forgot how to love without control. It echoed through me, settling somewhere deep. For years I'd told myself my family didn't care. Maybe the truth was sadder, they cared the only way they knew how. I set the notebook down and poked at the fire. The flames leaned toward me, flickering low. Outside, the storm had stopped, and the silence felt expectant, like the world was holding its breath. Then my phone rang. The sound startled me. I hadn't turned it back on since the visit. My stomach twisted when I saw the name on the screen. Mom. For 10 seconds I just watched it ring. For 10 years I'd always answered on the first. This time I let it go to voicemail. The call ended, then started again. I hesitated the same way I used to hesitate before stepping into a cold pool. Then finally I swiped to answer. Hi, I said softly. Melissa. Her voice was small, uneven. I'd never heard it sound so unsure. I didn't know where to start. I waited. I shouldn't have said those things. Last night or all the other nights, she continued. You were right. I did treat you like the help. Maybe because I didn't know how else to need you. The words hit harder than I expected. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Mom, I said carefully, I just wanted to be your daughter, not your maid. Not the one who made everything perfect. Her breath caught. I know that now. Silence stretched between us, not heavy this time, but fragile. I thought love meant taking care of everyone, she said, voice cracking. My mother raised me that way. If you weren't giving, you weren't good. I thought I was doing right by you. I felt tears gather at the corners of my eyes. You taught me to be strong, I whispered, but you punished me every time I was. A sound escaped her, a quiet sob that made my chest ache. You broke my heart when you left, she said, but I think I needed it. It made me see who I'd become. For the first time in my life, she wasn't defending herself. She wasn't deflecting, manipulating, or pretending to be fine. She was human, scared, remorseful. And somehow that hurt even more. I took a shaky breath. I forgive you, I said. But I'm not ready to come back yet. I need to build something for myself first, a life that doesn't depend on being needed. She was quiet for a long moment. That's all I ever wanted for you, she said softly. I just didn't know how to let you have it. I smiled through tears. We're both learning. We talked for another 10 minutes about nothing and everything, the weather, the kids, the new bakery near her house. It was awkward, stilted, but gentle. When she finally said I love you, it sounded different this time, less like a command, more like a confession. After I hung up, I sat in the stillness for a long time, staring at the dying fire. The world felt softer, as if something invisible had shifted. I walked to the table and picked up the candle I'd lit days ago. Its wick was short now, the wax melted low. I struck a match and watched the flame bloom again. For you, I whispered. For me. For both of us trying to get it right. The light flickered golden and steady, then another buzz from my phone. A text this time. I wiped my eyes before looking. It was from Clara. Mom told me, she called. I'm sorry too. Let's talk when you're ready. I stared at the screen, my heart catching somewhere between disbelief and relief. I typed back slowly. Thank you. That means more than you think. I set the phone down and leaned back against the table. The fire popped behind me. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel pulled in two directions. There was no anger left, no guilt either, just space. Space to rest, to breathe, to rebuild. Outside, the snow had stopped completely. The sky was clear, stars sharp and cold above the pines. I wrapped myself in a blanket and stepped out onto the porch. The air stung my skin, but it felt alive. I thought about everything that had brought me here, the years of silence, the guilt, the endless effort to prove my worth. Maybe this was what real freedom felt like, not escape, but understanding. Behind me, the candle flickered in the window. Its light spilled onto the snow, small but bright. I smiled, realizing it wasn't just mine anymore. The phone buzzed once more. A short message from Dad this time. Your mother's sleeping better tonight. Thank you. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Instead, I whispered into the cold air, You're welcome. The stars shimmered faintly in response. The woods were so quiet I could hear the snow settle on the branches. I thought about the little girl I used to be, the one who wrapped everyone else's gifts but never opened her own. Maybe she'd waited her whole life for this moment to feel peace that wasn't borrowed or conditional. I went back inside, curled up by the fire, and let my eyes close. My mother's voice still echoed faintly in my mind, softer now, almost loving. Forgiveness didn't erase the past, but it made room for tomorrow. When I woke the next morning, light was pouring through the windows, golden and bright. The phone was quiet. The world was too. I stood there for a moment, letting it sink in. I didn't know what would happen next, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of that. I poured myself coffee, sat by the window, and watched sunlight touch the snow. I didn't return home that night, or the next, but for the first time, I felt like I had one. The snow was already melting when I drove down the mountain a few days later. The road curved between tall evergreens, sunlight spilling through their branches in soft ribbons of gold. Every mile closer to Portland felt like peeling off an old layer of fear. The city appeared through the haze like a faded memory, gray rooftops, wet pavement, the faint hum of traffic. It wasn't the same place I'd left behind. Or maybe it was me who wasn't the same. When I parked in front of my house, the first thing I noticed was how ordinary it looked. The porch light I'd left on still glowed faintly. The wreath had gone dry and brittle, its pine needles scattered across the steps. I stood there for a while, just breathing. This house had seen every version of me, daughter, host, caretaker, ghost. Now it would have to meet the new one. Inside, the air was stale but familiar. My note still sat on the table exactly where I'd left it. This year I chose peace. The words didn't sting anymore. They felt earned. I ran my fingers over the paper, then opened the windows to let in fresh air. Cold winds swept through the living room, carrying the faint scent of rain and freedom. I cleaned slowly, not because I had to, but because I wanted to reclaim the space. Every dish I washed, every surface I wiped felt like removing the fingerprints of old guilt. I lit a candle, brewed tea, and sat down at the table with my sketchbook. For the first time in years, I wasn't planning a menu or writing a list for someone else. I wrote one just for me, things that make me happy. The first few entries were simple painting, morning walks, hot tea, sunlight on wood floors. Then came the harder ones, saying no, asking for help, resting without apology. By the time I finished, the list felt like a quiet promise to myself. I spent the next few days settling back into the city. My classroom was waiting for me, walls still covered in the bright chaos of my students' paintings. When I walked in, the smell of paint and chalk dust hit me like a memory of joy. The kids ran up to hug me, their small hands leaving colorful smudges on my coat. "Where were you, Miss Carter?" one asked. "I had to go find some peace," I said, smiling. That afternoon, as they painted winter scenes, one of the girls handed me a picture she'd made. A woman standing in front of a cabin, snow falling gently around her. I looked at the drawing for a long moment before hanging it on the wall. "That's beautiful," I told her. "Keep it there. It reminds me of something important." When class ended, I lingered alone in the quiet room, running my hand over the row of small paintbrushes. For years, I'd poured everything into caring for others, my students, my family, anyone who needed a steady hand. But now, for the first time, I was learning to care for myself, too. One afternoon, I stopped at a cafe near the school. The barista, a young woman with bright eyes and a messy bun, greeted me with a smile. "You're back," she said, recognizing me from months before. "Back and starting over," I replied. She laughed. "Aren't we all?" I found a table near the window and watched people hurry down the street, their breath rising in small clouds. A young couple argued softly at the corner. An old man fed crumbs to pigeons. Life moved on, indifferent and kind at the same time. I sipped my coffee and felt an odd gratitude for its ordinariness. That night, I pulled out my paints again. The canvas had been blank for months, untouched since before the storm of Christmas. I mixed soft blues and pale golds, letting the brush move without thought. Slowly, a familiar scene appeared, trees heavy with snow, a cabin glowing with light, and a small figure standing outside, face tilted toward the sky. I painted until my hands ached. When I stepped back, I realized what I'd made. It wasn't loneliness on that canvas, it was freedom. My phone buzzed on the counter. Steven's name lit up the screen. "Hey," his voice came through, warm, easy. "I just wanted to see how you're doing." "I'm good," I said, meaning it. "Better than I've been in a long time." He hesitated. "Can I see you sometime? Maybe coffee?" "No pressure," I smiled. "Coffee sounds nice." We met a few days later at the same cafe. He was waiting at the corner table, hands wrapped around a mug. The moment I saw him, a calm washed over me. There was no guilt this time, no need to explain myself. "You look different," he said, studying me. "I feel different," I replied. He nodded. "You did something most people never do. You stopped running from yourself." I laughed softly. "I stopped running for everyone else." We talked for hours about work, art, small things. When we parted, there were no promises, just a mutual understanding. He didn't need to rescue me anymore, and I didn't need to be saved. That was the quiet beauty of it. Later that night, as I curled up on the couch, my phone buzzed again. A family group text lit up the screen, a picture of my parents and Clara sitting around their kitchen table, smiling, dinner half eaten. "Everyone helped this time," Mom wrote. "Next year, your turn to rest again." A laugh bubbled up before I could stop it. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I typed a short reply, "Proud of you all, love you." Then I turned the phone face down and leaned back, letting the soft glow of the lamp wash over the room. The next morning, I walked to the river before sunrise. The air was crisp, the city quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. Frost clung to the benches along the path. I stood by the water and watched the sky shift from gray to pink. The reflection rippled with light, and I thought about how peace wasn't a destination. It was a decision I'd have to make again and again. When I got home, the unfinished painting on my easel caught the first light of dawn. I picked up the brush and added a few final strokes, a candle glowing in the cabin window. I signed my name in the corner and whispered the title aloud, "The Christmas I Chose Myself." It wasn't just a painting. It was proof that I'd survived something invisible, that I'd come back different, softer, stronger. As evening fell, I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window. Snow began to drift again, light and slow, blanketing the street in silence. I closed my eyes and smiled. Freedom no longer felt like escape. It felt like coming home to myself. I whispered into the stillness, "Peace doesn't need witnesses. It just needs to stay." And for the first time, I believed it would. The weeks after New Year's passed quietly, the kind of calm that felt earned. My life had found a rhythm again, teaching, painting, breathing. Each day began with sunlight across my kitchen floor and ended with the soft glow of a candle beside my bed. For the first time, peace didn't feel like a visitor. It felt like a home I was finally learning how to keep. But peace I was learning never stays untested. One afternoon in late February, I was at my desk grading drawings when my phone buzzed. The email subject line read "Family Meeting. Important." My chest tightened before I even opened it. It was from Mom. "We've been talking," the message began. "Your father's retiring next month. We're planning a small dinner, nothing fancy. But we'll need your help organizing, of course. You've always been so good at making things special. It wouldn't feel right without you." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the words until they blurred. My coffee went cold beside me. The request was so familiar, it almost felt automatic, like a script I'd memorized years ago. They hadn't learned much after all. I closed the laptop and sat there listening to the hum of the city outside. For a few minutes, I tried to convince myself it was harmless, that they didn't mean anything by it. But deep down, I recognized the pattern, the polite version of control. I poured myself another coffee and opened my notebook, the same one I'd written in at the cabin. On one page, I drew 2 columns, reasons to say yes and reasons to say no. Under yes, I wrote family tradition, keeping peace. Under no, boundaries, self-respect, freedom. The list of no's grew longer with every sip of coffee. By the time I finished, my decision was clear. That evening, I met Stephen for dinner at a small Italian place near the waterfront. The lights were soft, the smell of garlic and bread filling the air. He listened quietly as I told him about the email. He smiled in that slow, patient way he always did when he knew I already had the answer. "Boundaries don't end when things get peaceful, Mel," he said. "That's when they really begin." I traced the rim of my wine glass. I just don't want to be the villain. Every time I say no, I feel like I'm betraying them. "Then stop trying to be their hero," he said simply. His words stayed with me all night. When I got home, I stood in front of my unfinished painting and stared at the candlelight reflected on the glass. I'd thought peace meant never fighting again. Maybe it just meant knowing when to stand still. 2 days later, the family meeting happened over video call. I hesitated before joining, but curiosity got the better of me. The screen flickered to life, Mom smiling too widely, Dad seated beside her with his usual neutral calm, and Clara sipping from a mug like she'd rather be anywhere else. Melissa Mom's voice was syrup, sweet. "It's been ages. You look well." I said. "You too. We just wanted to talk about your father's celebration," she began. "It's not a big deal, but since you're so talented with details, we thought—" "Mom," I interrupted gently, "I'll come, but only as a guest." The smile froze on her face. "Oh, well, that's fine, of course. I just thought I won't be organizing anything," I said, my voice calm, steady. "I've done my share of hosting. I want to celebrate with you, not work for you." The silence on the other end stretched long. Dad coughed softly. Clara raised an eyebrow, smirking into her mug. "Good for you, Mel." Mom blinked, clearly thrown. "Of course, dear, we'll manage." When the call ended, I stared at the dark screen for a while. The old me would have felt guilt twisting like wire in my chest, but now there was only relief and a quiet pride I couldn't quite explain. Later that night, I walked out onto my balcony. The city shimmered under a thin layer of mist. A street musician played somewhere below the melody of a saxophone curling up through the cold air. I wrapped my coat tighter and whispered, "Old guilt dies slow, but it dies." The next morning I got a message from Clara. "Proud of you for saying no." I told Mom it's time we all take turns. I read it twice, then smiled. It was a small thing, but it meant more than she'd ever know. "Thank you," I typed back. "It feels different now. Easier." "It should," she replied. "You taught us how." I put the phone down and stared out the window. Outside, tiny flakes of snow began to fall again, floating lazily over the rooftops. The sight made me laugh quietly. Snow used to mean chaos, family dinners, exhaustion, cleanup. Now it just meant winter. And I was finally warm. That afternoon, I met one of my colleagues for coffee. She was new, young, bright-eyed. "Your art projects are incredible," she said. "You make everything look effortless." I smiled. It took me 33 years to learn that effortless doesn't mean easy. After she left, I stayed at the table doodling in my sketchbook. I drew my cabin, the pines, the little window glowing with light, and beneath it I wrote, "Sometimes saying no is the most loving thing you can do." When I got home that night, I turned off my phone and lit a candle. I didn't check my emails. I didn't think about plans or expectations. I just sat by the window watching the flame reflect on the glass. They used to call me the glue that held the family together. Maybe that was true. But sometimes the glue has to let go so everyone else can stand on their own. The candle burned low, its flame steady and small. I closed my eyes, whispering, "Let go." And I did. For the first time in my life, letting go didn't feel like losing. It felt like living. The envelope came on a Wednesday morning, tucked neatly between bills and a grocery flyer. I almost missed it. My name was written in my mother's careful cursive, the same handwriting that used to label lunch bags and birthday cards. The sight of it made my chest tighten. I sat at the kitchen table, running my thumb over the edge of the paper before opening it. Inside was a short letter. "Dinner this Sunday at our house. No duties required. Just come. No extra words, no guilt, no hidden demands." Beneath it, a postscript, "Love, Mom." I read it twice, half expecting to find some invisible string attached. But there was nothing, just an invitation. My fingers trembled slightly as I folded it back into the envelope. For 10 years I'd been the host, the planner, the servant in my own family story. Maybe it was time to see what happened when I wasn't. On Sunday, I drove down the familiar street that used to make my stomach twist. The sky was pale and cloudless, the air sharp with the last chill of winter. When I turned into my parents' driveway, I almost didn't recognize the house. It looked smaller, somehow quieter. The porch lights were warm, not blinding. Mom opened the door before I even reached the steps. "Dinner's ready," she said with a soft smile. "We all cooked this time." I paused, taking in the scent of rosemary and baked bread wafting through the air. It didn't smell like exhaustion anymore. It smelled like effort. Inside, the dining room glowed with candles. The table was simple, no centerpiece, no perfection, just food and space. Dad stood at the counter slicing bread, and Clara set out glasses of water. No one was sitting back waiting to be served. For the first time, everyone was moving together. "Hi," I said quietly. Dad looked up. "There's my girl." His voice caught a little. "It's good to see you. It's good to be here," I said, and meant it. We sat down. There was no tension, no edge to the air. Conversation came easily about work, the weather, Clara's new apartment. Every few minutes, someone laughed. It wasn't the brittle, polite laughter I remembered. It was real. Halfway through dinner, Dad raised his glass. "To the woman who taught us what boundaries really mean," he said, "and what love looks like without control." The room fell silent. Mom's eyes glistened in the candlelight. "You leaving that night," she said softly, "it woke me up. I realized love doesn't mean ownership." I swallowed hard. "And forgiveness doesn't mean going back," I said. "It means moving forward together." We clinked glasses, the sound bright and clean. For the first time in years, my chest didn't feel heavy around them. As we ate dessert, flashes of old memories flickered through my mind. The Christmas I spent crying in the kitchen, the year I cooked through the flu, the sound of Clara's laughter when the wine spilled across my dress. I saw those ghosts for what they were now, lessons, not wounds. Clara disappeared into the kitchen for a moment and came back holding a small box wrapped in plain paper. "I made you something," she said, a little shy. Inside was a hand-stitched apron, the fabric soft and worn, embroidered in navy thread. No more hostess, just sister. I laughed through my tears. "It's perfect." She grinned. "You taught me that saying no doesn't mean stop caring. It just means start living." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of you." For a moment, the three of us just sat there, quiet and full. The candle flames flickered like tiny hearts. Later, Mom asked me to step outside with her. We stood on the porch, the cold air wrapping around us. The sun had sunk low, staining the horizon pink and gold. "I used to think strong women never rested," she said. "You showed me they do, and that's why they stay strong." I smiled. "You raised me to carry everything. I just finally learned to put some of it down." Her breath fogged in the air. "You broke my heart that night, but you also healed it." I reached for her hand. "We both had to break a little to see the cracks." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Then, for the first time in my life, she pulled me into a real hug, one that didn't demand or apologize. Just love. When we went back inside, Clara was clearing the table, humming softly. Dad was wiping down the counter. It was such an ordinary scene, yet it felt sacred. So Clara said with mock seriousness, "Next Christmas, my place. Everyone brings a dish, no exceptions." Mom laughed. "Deal." I smiled, watching them, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the candles. The cycle had finally shifted. Tradition wasn't gone, it had just learned how to breathe. Before leaving, Mom opened a bottle of red wine. She poured 3 glasses and handed one to me. "The same kind as last year," she said with a wry smile. "This time, nobody spills." I raised my glass. "And even if we do, we'll just clean it together." Laughter filled the room, light and easy. When it was time to go, I stepped outside alone for a moment. Snow had started to fall again, thin and soft, catching the porch light like glitter. I turned back to look through the window. My family sat around the table, still talking, still laughing. No one was shouting or demanding or waiting for me to fix anything. A year ago, I'd walked away from that house, certain I'd never feel at home in it again. Now, standing in the snow, I realized I already was. Not because they'd changed everything, but because I had. I walked to my car, brushing snow off the windshield. Before starting the engine, I looked up at the house one last time. The glow from the windows shimmered in the falling flakes. A year ago, I left this house to find peace. Tonight, I found it waiting for me inside. As I drove away, I didn't feel the usual ache of leaving. I felt stillness, like closing a book after the final chapter, and knowing the story was complete. The road curved away behind me, the snow falling in quiet streaks across the headlights. For the first time, there was no dread, no guilt, no lingering question of whether I'd done the right thing. I knew I had. And as the house disappeared from view, I whispered into the soft, dark peace, doesn't mean the story's over. It means I finally know how to write the next one. It's strange how peace stops feeling like rebellion once you get used to it. A year had passed since that Christmas, but it felt like another lifetime. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the heater and the scratch of my pen across paper. Morning light spilled through the curtains, painting the walls in pale gold. My little tree sat in the corner, trimmed with handmade ornaments and dried oranges that smelled faintly of cinnamon. The air was calm, the kind of calm I used to chase but never catch. I'd made coffee, but I barely drank it. I was writing again, something I hadn't done in years. Not lists or letters or grocery reminders, but something for me. A collection of short reflections, really all under one title, Letters to Women Who Forgot Themselves. It wasn't meant for publication. It was meant for the quiet places in me that had gone unheard for too long. Each line was a truth I wished someone had told me sooner. When I finished, I set down the pen and took a long breath. I glanced around my home. It was different now, smaller, simpler, lighter. There were plants in the windowsill, a few unfinished canvases leaning against the wall, and a faint smell of lavender from the candle burning in the kitchen. I'd stopped trying to make everything perfect. Now I just made it mine. I got dressed, slowly tugging on my favorite sweater, the one with the paint stain on the sleeve. Sundays were my favorite days, not for church, not for chores, but because they were mine. I packed a small tote bag with paints and brushes and headed out the door. The city was waking up as I drove toward the community center. The river glinted under a gray sky, and the sidewalks sparkled with frost. When I arrived, the art room was already buzzing softly with chatter. My group of women, some retired, some recently divorced, all searching for something unnamed, sat around the long tables with blank canvases waiting. "All right, ladies," I said with a smile, setting down my supplies. "Today we're painting our happy places. No rules, no pressure, just color." They laughed, a few rolling their eyes. "I don't even know what mine is anymore," said Carol, a grandmother who wore scarves like armor. "That's the point," I told her gently. "You'll remember once you start." For the next 2 hours, the room filled with color and stories. Someone painted her garden, another a beach from her childhood. One woman painted nothing but shades of blue, saying it reminded her of peace. I walked between the tables, offering brushes, encouragement, laughter. When I sat down to paint, I didn't think I just let my hands move. By the time the class ended, I'd painted a cabin under a snowy sky, a candle glowing in its window. It wasn't about the past anymore. It was a reminder peace is a place you build, not find. As everyone packed up, Carol came over, wiping her hands on a towel. "You know," she said, looking at my painting, "it's never too late to start again." I smiled. "It's never too late to remember who you were, either." That afternoon, as I locked up the classroom, I saw my parents' car in the parking lot. My mother waved from the passenger seat, her smile soft and unguarded. I hadn't known they were coming. When I walked up, Dad held out a thermos. "Brought you some of your favorite tea," he said. I laughed. "Since when do you know my favorite tea?" "Since your mother made me memorize it," he replied. They followed me back inside, and I brewed 3 cups. The 3 of us sat by the window overlooking the frozen playground. For once, there was no awkwardness, just the quiet comfort of people who had finally stopped trying to fix each other. "We wanted to see your class," Mom said. "Clara told us about it. She says you're teaching more than painting." "Maybe," I said. "Mostly, I'm reminding people it's okay to take up space." Mom nodded thoughtfully. "You're reminding me too." When they left, she hugged me tightly. "I used to think strong meant silent," she said. "You showed me it means steady." After they drove off, I stood by the window a moment longer, watching their car disappear down the street. Then I walked back to my canvas and signed my name at the bottom, in careful letters, Melissa Carter. It felt good to see it there, not as an obligation but as a declaration. That evening, as I cooked dinner, Stephen called. We hadn't talked much since Christmas, but when I heard his voice, something familiar and easy settled in my chest. "Hey, stranger," he said. "Still changing the world one art class at a time." Barely I laughed. "Just trying to help people find a bit of peace." He hesitated. "And did you find yours?" I stirred the soup on the stove, smiling. "Most days, yes. The rest of the time I remember where to look." He was quiet for a moment. "I'd like to see you sometime." "Maybe dinner sounds nice," I said, and meant it. Not because I needed him, but because I wanted to share this new version of myself with someone who'd seen the old one. When I hung up, I carried my meal to the table. The house smelled like garlic and rosemary, the same scent that had once meant exhaustion. Now it meant home. Later, as I washed dishes, my phone buzzed again, this time, a message from Clara. "Mom says we're hosting an art night next month. Everyone brings a dish, you bring the paint." I laughed out loud, shaking my head. "Deal," I replied. After the kitchen was clean, I sat by the fireplace, sketchbook open, pen in hand. The flame flickered low, casting light on the words I'd written earlier that week. Freedom isn't loud. It's the quiet decision to stop apologizing for being yourself. I ran my fingers over the sentence and added another line beneath it. And once you learn peace, you teach it without even trying. Outside, a few flakes of snow drifted past the window. I got up, lit a single candle, and placed it on the windowsill. Its glow shimmered against the glass, soft and warm. I thought of the women from my class, my mother's face, Clara's message, Stephen's voice, and the life I'd built from the pieces of what came before. It wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. It was real. As midnight approached, I wrote one last entry in my notebook. Once I thought peace meant being alone. Now I know it means being free to love without losing myself. I closed the book, blew out the candle, and whispered into the quiet. Finally mine. The flame went out, but the warmth stayed. Last Christmas I walked away from everything I thought made me a good daughter. This year I walked home as a woman who finally knows her worth. The snow fell softly outside my apartment window, quiet and slow, like the world was exhaling. I had spent the morning painting, the smell of turpentine still lingering in the air, and now the canvas on my easel glowed with fresh color, a candle in a window, the same one I'd painted a year ago, but this time the flame was brighter. The table was set for 4. Nothing fancy, just roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and a bottle of wine I'd been saving. The tree in the corner shimmered with handmade ornaments from my students, small paper stars and splashes of color that made me smile. I caught my reflection in the window and barely recognized myself. There was no tension in my shoulders, no weight on my chest, just stillness, just me. When the doorbell rang, I didn't feel that familiar spike of anxiety. I opened the door to find my parents standing there, arms full of grocery bags and laughter. Clara followed behind them, balancing a pie she'd baked herself. "Don't drop it this time," Dad teased, and she stuck out her tongue like a child. I let them in, and for a moment the apartment filled with warmth, the kind that didn't come from candles or food. We moved easily together, cooking, chatting, laughing. There were no orders, no criticisms. My mother even asked, "Where do you want me to put this?" instead of telling me what to do. The words sounded small, but they meant everything. When dinner was ready, we sat around the table, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was performing. We talked about art, about Clara's new job, about Dad's gardening obsession. Every now and then we fell into silence, but it wasn't the uneasy kind. It was full and comfortable. Halfway through the meal, Dad raised his glass. "To our first Christmas that actually feels like Christmas," he said. Mom laughed. "And to our daughter for teaching us that peace isn't about perfection." I smiled. "And to all of us for learning how to love each other without losing ourselves." We clinked glasses. The sound was clear and soft, like the final note of a song. After dessert, Clara disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a small wrapped box. "Don't worry," she said, grinning. "No pie inside." I opened it carefully. Inside was a keychain, a tiny silver cabin with a little candle etched into the window. "It's for your studio," she said, "so you never forget that your piece built all of ours." I felt my throat tighten. "You have no idea what this means to me." Mom reached across the table, taking my hand. "We do," she said quietly, "and we're proud of you." For a while, no one spoke. The moment was too sacred for words. Then the knock came, a soft, uncertain tap at the door. When I opened it, Stephen stood there, snow in his hair and a paper bag in his hands. "I come bearing cookies," he said, smiling. "I figured it's better than texting Merry Christmas at midnight." Mom waved him in before I could answer. "You're just in time for coffee," she said. Clara raised her eyebrows at me, smirking, but for once I didn't feel flustered. Stephen joined us at the table and the conversation started up again as naturally as if he'd always been part of it. Later, after my family left, the apartment was quiet again. Stephen stayed behind to help me clean up. We worked side by side, washing dishes and drying them in an easy rhythm. "Your family's different," he said. "They seem lighter." "They are," I said softly. "We all are." When everything was done, we stood by the window watching the snow fall over the city. "You did it, you know," he said. "Did what turned survival into peace." I smiled. "It took long enough." He looked at the candle on the windowsill. "You still light that thing every night?" "Always," I said. "Not to remember what I lost, but what I found." The flame flickered, its reflection glowing on the glass. Outside, the world was quiet and silver, and for the first time I felt like I truly belonged in it. After he left, I stood at the window alone for a while, watching the snow drift through the streetlights. My reflection looked back at me, not the servant, not the caretaker, not the woman trying to be everything for everyone. Just Melissa. Just enough. I thought of all the women like me, the ones who spent years hosting, fixing, smoothing, over swallowing hurt to keep the peace. The ones who never got to sit at their own table. If you've ever been her, if you've ever given so much that you forgot what it's like to be whole, I hope this story finds you. I hope you know that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's sacred. You can forgive without returning. You can love without losing yourself. And you can build peace that doesn't depend on anyone else lighting it for you. Because the best revenge isn't walking away. It's walking back stronger, calmer, freer. If this story felt a little like your own, tell me about it in the comments. I read every one, and every story shared here helps another woman breathe easier. If you believe that setting boundaries can be the beginning of healing, hit like, share this story, and stay with us. There are more stories waiting about love, family, forgiveness, and the quiet kind of revenge called self-respect. The candle on the sill flickered as I whispered Merry Christmas, and for the first time the word home finally felt like it belonged to me.